The stagecoach rattled violently as it made its final approach toward Agua Caliente, Arizona territory, in the autumn of 1885. Inside, Zara Matthews clutched her small leather bag with trembling hands, her face streaked with tears that wouldn't stop flowing no matter how many times she dabbed at them with her handkerchief. The other passengers had long since given up offering comfort, settling instead into an uncomfortable silence as the young woman's quiet sobs provided a melancholy soundtrack to their journey. "Last stop, Agua Caliente," the driver called down as the coach lurched to a halt in a cloud of dust. Zara stepped down onto Arizona soil, her legs unsteady after 3 days of travel. Her simple blue dress, once pressed and proper when she'd left St. Louis, now hung wrinkled and travel-worn around her slender frame. The setting sun cast long shadows across the main street, painting the wooden buildings in amber hues that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. "Miss Matthews?" a deep voice called from across the street. She looked up through tear-blurred vision to see a tall man in a worn cowboy hat crossing toward her. His sun-bronzed face was partially obscured by a neatly trimmed beard, and his blue eyes caught her attention immediately. They were kind but wary. This must be him, Jacob Parker. The man she'd agreed to marry through nothing but exchanged letters and desperate circumstance. "Mr. Parker," she managed, her voice breaking as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. He stopped a respectful distance away, studying her with growing concern. His broad shoulders stiffened as he took in her distress. "You're crying," he stated simply, as if confirming a suspicion. "I'm sorry," Zara whispered, furiously wiping at her face. "This is hardly the impression I intended to make." Jacob Parker moved closer, taking her bag from her trembling hand. His weathered face softened as he looked down at her, and something in his expression made Zara's breath catch in her throat. "Miss Matthews," he said gently, "I don't know what sorrows brought you here or what fears you carry, but I want you to know this." He paused, his voice deepening with sincerity. "You'll only cry happy tears from now on, that's a promise." The unexpected tenderness in his voice nearly undid her completely. Zara had prepared herself for many things on this journey: hardship, loneliness, even cruelty, but not kindness. Not this immediate, sincere compassion from a man she'd never met before today. "You don't know what you're promising," she managed to say. "Maybe not," Jacob admitted, "but I'm a man of my word, Miss Matthews, and I intend to keep it." He gestured toward a wagon parked nearby. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town." "Are you ready to go, or would you prefer to rest at the hotel tonight?" "The ranch, please," Zara said quickly. The thought of being alone with her thoughts in some strange hotel room was unbearable. "I've come all this way to be your wife. I should at least see my new home." Something flickered across Jacob's face, surprise, perhaps, or approval. "Very well, let's get you home before dark, then." As they walked to the wagon, Zara felt the curious stares of townspeople. Agua Caliente wasn't large, but it was busy enough at this hour, with men leaving saloons and shops closing for the evening. A mail-order bride arriving in tears would certainly give them something to gossip about. "Don't mind them," Jacob said quietly, helping her onto the wagon seat. "They're just curious. News travels fast in a small town." Zara nodded, clutching her reticule tightly as Jacob climbed up beside her and took the reins. With a gentle click of his tongue, he urged the horses forward, and they began their journey away from town. "I know this isn't conventional," Jacob said after they'd traveled in silence for several minutes, "but I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you right away. The preacher comes through town every 3rd Sunday. We can wait until you're ready." Zara glanced at him, surprised by his consideration. The man in his letters had seemed practical, even businesslike, a rancher in need of a wife who could cook and keep house. This thoughtfulness hadn't been apparent on paper. "Thank you," she said softly. "That's very kind." "It's not kindness, Miss Matthews. It's respect." They fell silent again as the wagon rolled along the dusty road. The landscape around them was unlike anything Zara had known in Missouri: vast stretches of ochre earth, dotted with scrubby vegetation, dramatic rock formations in the distance. and a sky so enormous it seemed to swallow everything beneath it. "It's beautiful," she whispered, almost to herself. Jacob looked at her with surprise. "Most Eastern women find it harsh at first." "I'm not most women, Mr. Parker." The corner of his mouth twitched. "No, I don't suppose you are." As they crested a small rise, Jacob pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is," he said, pointing ahead. "Parker Ranch." Zara followed his gesture to see a modest but well-maintained ranch house nestled in a small valley. A large barn stood nearby, along with several corrals and outbuildings. It wasn't grand, but even from this distance, she could see it was built with care. "It's not much compared to what you might be used to," Jacob said, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. "It's more than I expected," Zara replied honestly, "and far more than I left behind." Jacob studied her face for a moment before nodding and urging the horses forward again. As they approached the ranch, Zara noticed smoke rising from the chimney. "Is someone there?" she asked, suddenly nervous. "My foreman's wife, Mrs. Wilkins. She comes in to help with cooking and such. I asked her to prepare supper for your arrival." "That was thoughtful." "Like I said, Miss Matthews, I aim to keep my promise." When they reached the house, Jacob helped her down from the wagon with strong, careful hands. Zara found herself looking up into his face, noticing for the first time the small scar above his right eyebrow and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, suggesting he smiled more often than his serious demeanor indicated. "Welcome home," he said quietly, "home." The word both terrified and comforted her. This place with this man she barely knew was now to be her home. There was no going back, no other options. Zara straightened her shoulders and gathered her courage. "Thank you, Mr. Parker. I hope I can make it worthy of the name, Mrs. Wilkins greeted them at the door, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s who immediately took Zara under her wing, clucking over her travel-worn appearance and red-rimmed eyes. "You poor dear, traveling all that way alone. Come in, come in. Supper's ready and I've prepared the guest room for you." Jacob cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilkins. I'll see to the horses while you get Miss Matthews settled." As he turned to leave, Zara called after him. "Mr. Parker," he paused, looking back at her with those steady blue eyes. "I thank you for meeting me, for keeping your word." Something softened in his expression. "Always will, Miss Matthews. Rest well." As Jacob walked toward the barn, Mrs. Wilkins guided Zara inside. The ranch house was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, and doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything was neat and clean, though decidedly masculine. "He's a good man," Mrs. Wilkins said, watching Zara take in her surroundings. "Works hard, treats folks fair, been alone too long, though." "His letters mentioned he was widowed," Zara ventured, setting her bag down. "Mrs. Wilkins nodded sadly. 5 years ago, Sarah was a sweet thing. Fever took her quick-like before the doctor could even get here from town." She patted Zara's arm. "But that's the past. You're here now, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you just now." "He was probably just concerned. I arrived in quite a state." "Maybe so," Mrs. Wilkins said with a knowing smile. "Let me show you to your room. You can wash up before supper." The guest room was small but tidy, with a narrow bed covered by a handmade quilt, a washstand with a ceramic basin, and a small chest of drawers. Through the window, Zara could see the barn where Jacob was tending to the horses. "He'll give you time," Mrs. Wilkins said, following her gaze. "Jacob Parker isn't one to rush things." "I hardly know what to expect," Zara admitted. "We've only exchanged letters." "Well, tonight you can start getting acquainted proper-like. Over food always the best way." Mrs. Wilkins handed her a towel. "I'll leave you to freshen up." Alone, Zara finally allowed herself a moment of true vulnerability. She sat on the edge of the bed, her body sagging with exhaustion and emotional fatigue. The tears threatened again, but she forced them back, enough crying. She had made her choice when she answered Jacob Parker's advertisement. Now she needed to face the consequences of that decision with as much dignity as she could muster. She washed her face in the cool water Mrs. Wilkins had provided, changed into her one other dress, a simple gray wool that had fared better in her luggage than the blue one, and pinned her dark hair into a neat bun. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror was pale and tired, but composed. When she emerged, Jacob had returned from the barn. He'd removed his hat and washed up, his dark hair still damp at the temples. He stood awkwardly by the fireplace, as if unsure of his place in his own home now that she was in it. "Feel better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you. Your home is lovely." "It's functional," he replied with a shrug. "Could use a woman's touch, I suppose." Mrs. Wilkins emerged from the kitchen, carrying a steaming pot. "Supper's ready. Come sit before it gets cold." The meal was simple but delicious: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Mrs. Wilkins kept the conversation flowing, asking Zara about her journey and sharing stories about the area. Jacob said little, but Zara noticed how intently he listened to her responses, as if cataloging every piece of information about her. After they finished eating, Mrs. Wilkins gathered her things to leave. "My Thomas will be wondering where I am. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon to help you get settled, Miss Matthews. Please call me Zara." Mrs. Wilkins beamed. "Zara, then, such a pretty name." When she had gone, an awkward silence fell between Zara and Jacob. They sat across from each other at the table, the remnants of their meal between them like a buffer. "So," Jacob finally said, "I guess we should talk about arrangements." Zara nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "As I said in town, I don't expect. That is, we don't need to rush into." He cleared his throat. "The marriage, I mean, we can wait for the circuit preacher, get to know each other better first." "That seems wise," Zara agreed quietly. "In the meantime, you'll have the guest room, of course. I sleep in the room down the hall." He hesitated. "I want you to be comfortable here, Zara, to feel safe." The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. "I appreciate that, Mr. Parker." "Jacob," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married, you should probably use my given name." "Jacob," she repeated, testing it on her tongue. A small smile touched his lips. "That's better." He stood and gathered their dishes. "Let me help you with these." "Oh, no, please," Zara started to protest, rising as well. "My mother raised me better than to let a lady clean up alone on her first night in a new place," he said firmly. "Besides, Sarah always said I made a decent kitchen hand." At the mention of his late wife, a shadow crossed his face, there and gone so quickly Zara almost missed it. "You must have loved her very much," she said softly. Jacob's hands stilled for a moment. "Yes," he said simply. "I did. I'm sorry for your loss." He nodded, accepting her sympathy without comment. Together, they cleared the table and washed the dishes, working in a silence that gradually became less uncomfortable. When they finished, Jacob showed her around the house properly, explaining where things were kept and how the stove could be temperamental in cold weather. "It's not much," he said again as they completed the tour, "but it's solid. I built most of it myself." "You did?" Zara couldn't hide her surprise. "Started with just a one-room cabin when I claimed the land 10 years ago, added on bit by bit." There was quiet pride in his voice. "The barn was first, then the house. Made sure it had 2 bedrooms from the start, hoping someday." He trailed off, and Zara understood what he didn't say. He had built this place with a family in mind. "It's a fine home, Jacob," she said sincerely. "You should be proud of what you've created here." Something in his expression softened. "Thank you." He glanced toward the window where darkness had fully fallen. "It's getting late. You must be exhausted from your journey." "I am rather tired," she admitted. "I'll let you get some rest then. Tomorrow I can show you around the ranch if you'd like." "I would like that very much." Jacob nodded, then hesitated as if wanting to say more. Instead, he simply said, "Good night, Zara. Sleep well." "Good night, Jacob." In the small guest room, Zara changed into her nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had happened. Just that morning, she had been on the stagecoach, terrified of what awaited her at its destination. Now she was here in the home of a man who seemed decent and kind, a far cry from what she had feared. Still, doubt crept in as she laid her head on the unfamiliar pillow. Jacob Parker seemed honorable, but she had been deceived before. And even if he was as good as he appeared, could she truly be a proper wife to him? Could she overcome her past and be the partner he needed? These questions chased each other through her mind as exhaustion finally claimed her, pulling her into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning came with golden light streaming through the small window. For a moment, Zara was disoriented, startled by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory returned the stagecoach, Jacob Parker, her new home in Arizona Territory. She dressed quickly in her blue dress, which Mrs. Wilkins had kindly hung to air out overnight. The wrinkles hadn't completely disappeared, but it looked respectable enough. After pinning her hair in a simple style, she ventured out to the main room. Jacob was already up, stoking the fire in the hearth. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and for a brief moment, Zara saw surprise in his eyes, as if he hadn't quite believed she would still be there in the morning light. "Good morning," she said, folding her hands in front of her to keep from fidgeting. "Morning," he replied. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected to. The bed is very comfortable." "Good." He nodded toward the stove. "Coffee's hot if you'd like some. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage breakfast if you're hungry." "Please let me," Zara said quickly. "Cooking is something I can actually do well." Jacob studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll finish with the fire while you get acquainted with the kitchen." Zara found eggs, bacon, and flour for biscuits in the pantry. As she worked, she felt Jacob's eyes on her occasionally, watching with what seemed like approval as she moved about the kitchen with growing confidence. They ate breakfast together at the table, and while the silence between them was still a bit awkward, it felt less strained than the night before. "These biscuits are good," Jacob said, helping himself to a second one. "Been a while since I had home cooking this tasty." Zara felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Thank you, my mother taught me." "Is she still in Missouri?" The question brought a fresh wave of pain. "No," Zara said softly. "My parents both passed 2 years ago, influenza." Jacob's expression sobered. "I'm sorry to hear that. Losing family is never easy." "No, it's not." Zara took a sip of coffee to steady herself. "After they died, I stayed with my uncle for a while, but it didn't work out." She kept her explanation vague, unwilling to share the full truth of that terrible time. "And that's when you answered my advertisement." "Yes, I needed." She hesitated. "A new beginning." Jacob nodded, seeming to understand there was more to the story than she was sharing. "Well, I'm glad you did. Not many women would be brave enough to travel across the country to marry a stranger, or desperate enough," Zara murmured before she could stop herself. His eyes sharpened. "Is that what you are, Zara? Desperate?" She met his gaze directly. "I prefer to think of it as determined. I made a choice, Jacob. I'm here because I want to be." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. She had chosen this path among limited options, but she was determined to make the best of it. After a moment, Jacob seemed satisfied with her answer. "Well, then, would you like to see the ranch today, meet the men?" "I would, yes." They finished breakfast, and Zara insisted on washing the dishes before they ventured outside. The morning air was crisp, but promised warmth later as the sun climbed higher in the clear blue sky. Jacob showed her around the property with evident pride, the corrals where several horses watched them curiously, the barn with its stalls and storage areas, the chicken coop where a dozen hens pecked contentedly at their feed. "It's not a big spread compared to some," Jacob explained as they walked, "but it's productive. We run about 200 head of cattle, keep 6 working horses, and grow enough feed to get through the winters." "How many men work for you?" Zara asked, noticing a bunkhouse at the edge of the yard. "Just 3 regular hands, plus Thomas Wilkins as foreman. Hire extra help during roundup and branding." He glanced at her. "Does that worry you, being out here with so few people?" Zara shook her head. "No, actually, it's rather a relief." Jacob raised an eyebrow but didn't press for an explanation. They found the ranch hands near the largest corral where they were training a young horse. Thomas Wilkins, a stocky man with graying hair and kind eyes that matched his wife's, introduced her to the others: Ben Hollies, a weathered cowboy in his 40s, Emilio Vasquez, a skilled horseman from Mexico, and Daniel Cooper, barely 20 and clearly the newest addition to the crew. "Mrs. Wilkins told us you arrived yesterday, Miss Matthews," Thomas said, tipping his hat respectfully. "We're mighty pleased to meet you." "Thank you, Mr. Wilkins, and please call me Zara." "The boss finally got himself a proper lady," Ben commented with a grin. "About time, Parker." Jacob cleared his throat. "Miss Matthews and I are getting acquainted. I'd appreciate if you boys would remember your manners." Yes, sir, Daniel said quickly, his young face earnest. We'll be on our best behavior, madam. Zara couldn't help but smile at his eagerness to please. I'm sure you're always perfect gentlemen. Emilio laughed. She has not seen them on Saturday nights in town, señorita. The easy camaraderie among the men was apparent, and Zara found herself relaxing slightly. These were good men, she could tell, loyal to Jacob and respectful in their own rough-edged way. After the introductions, Jacob continued showing her around, explaining the operations of the ranch in detail. He seemed pleased by her genuine interest, answering her questions patiently and sometimes expanding on topics she expressed curiosity about. By midday, the sun was high and hot. Jacob suggested they return to the house for dinner, the midday meal, as she learned it was called on the ranch. Mrs. Wilkins left some cold chicken and bread, he said as they walked back. I hope that's all right. She usually comes in the afternoons, but I told her we could manage lunch on our own today. It sounds perfect, Zara assured him. As they approached the house, a rider came galloping up the road toward the ranch. Jacob tensed slightly beside her, his hand moving instinctively toward his hip where, Zara now noticed, he wore a holstered revolver. Stay here, he said quietly, stepping slightly in front of her. The rider slowed as he approached, and Jacob relaxed. It's just Howard from the telegraph office, he explained. Then, to the man, what brings you out here? Howard, the telegrapher, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, dismounted. Got an urgent wire for you, Parker. Thought I'd better bring it out personally. Jacob took the telegram, his expression guarded as he read it. Zara watched his face carefully, trying to gauge the news from his reaction. His jaw tightened, but otherwise he revealed little. Thank you for bringing this, he said to Howard. Would you like some water before you head back? Much obliged, the telegrapher said, glancing curiously at Zara. This is Miss Matthews, Jacob said, noticing the look. My fiancée. The word sent an unexpected flutter through Zara's chest. It was the first time Jacob had named what they were to each other. Madam, Howard said, tipping his hat, pleasure to meet you. Town's been wondering when Parker here would find himself a wife. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Howard, Zara replied politely. After the telegrapher had refreshed himself and departed, Zara turned to Jacob. Is everything all right? You seemed concerned about the telegram. Jacob folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. It's nothing for you to worry about, just some business in town I need to attend to tomorrow. His tone was casual, but Zara sensed there was more to it than he was saying. Still, she didn't press. They had known each other barely a day. She had no right to demand his confidences, yet, inside, they prepared a simple lunch together. As they ate, Jacob asked about her life in Missouri, careful to focus on the happier memories rather than the recent tragedies. Zara found herself sharing stories about her childhood on the small farm where she'd grown up, her father's gift for storytelling, her mother's prized recipe book that she'd brought with her to Arizona. You miss them, Jacob observed. Every day, Zara admitted. But talking about them helps, somehow, Jacob nodded. Sarah used to say the same thing about her parents, that remembering the good times was a way of keeping them alive. She sounds like she was very wise. She was, a sad smile touched his lips. You would have liked her, I think. I'm sure I would have. Zara hesitated, then asked, do you have any family, Jacob? A brother in California. Haven't seen him in years, though we write occasionally. Parents are both gone, he shrugged. The ranch keeps me busy enough that I don't think about it much. But there was loneliness in his eyes that told Zara he thought about it more than he admitted. She recognized it because she'd seen the same look in her own reflection many times. After lunch, Mrs. Wilkins arrived as promised, bringing with her a basket of fresh vegetables from her garden and a wealth of local gossip that she shared freely as she helped Zara unpack her meager belongings. Not much to work with, is there? The older woman observed, eyeing Zara's 2 dresses and handful of personal items. No, Zara admitted. I had to sell most of my things before I left Missouri. Mrs. Wilkins patted her hand. Don't you worry, dear, I have a daughter about your size who married last year. I'm sure she has some things she could spare, and there's a decent seamstress in town will get you fixed up proper. That's very kind, but I couldn't impose. Nonsense. What are neighbors for, Mrs.? Wilkins bustled about, showing Zara where linens were stored and explaining the peculiarities of the house. This place was just waiting for a woman's touch, she declared. Jacob's kept it clean enough, but it needs curtains and cushions and such to make it a real home, while Mrs. Wilkins chattered, Zara found herself drawn to the window where she could see Jacob in the distance, working with his men to repair a section of fence. Even from here, she could see the respect with which the others treated him, deferring to his judgment without question. There was something compelling about the way he moved, confident, purposeful, yet without arrogance. He's a good man, Mrs. Wilkins said softly, noticing her gaze. Honest to a fault, stubborn as the day is long, mind you, but fair, he seems to be, Zara agreed cautiously. Whatever brought you here in tears yesterday, you can put it behind you now. Jacob Parker is many things, but he's not a man who'd make a woman cry. Zara turned to face her. Mrs. Wilkins, I appreciate your kindness, truly I do, but you don't know me or what I've been through. The older woman's face softened. No, child, I don't, but I know trouble when I see it in a person's eyes, and I know healing when I see it start to take root. She patted Zara's arm. Now, let's talk about supper. I thought I'd show you how to make Jacob's favorite stew. The rest of the afternoon passed in domestic activity. Mrs. Wilkins was a patient teacher, showing Zara where everything was kept and explaining the rhythm of ranch life when meals were expected, how the men's schedule changed with the seasons, what kind of foods stored best in the root cellar beneath the house. By the time the sun began to set, a hearty beef stew was simmering on the stove, filling the house with a savory aroma. Mrs. Wilkins departed with promises to return the next day with some of her daughter's clothes for Zara to try. Jacob returned as twilight deepened, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and honest work. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the sight of Zara at the stove, and something in his expression made her heart beat a little faster. Smells like heaven in here, he said, removing his hat. Mrs. Wilkins showed me how to make your favorite stew, Zara explained. I hope it meets your expectations. A smile touched the corner of his mouth. I'm sure it will. He crossed to the wash basin near the back door and rolled up his sleeves to wash. Zara tried not to stare at the play of muscles in his forearms as he scrubbed the day's dirt from his skin. Over dinner, Jacob told her about the day's work on the ranch, explaining his plans for expanding the north pasture and possibly adding more cattle next year. Zara listened attentively, asking questions that showed her interest was genuine. You know more about ranching than I would have expected, Jacob observed. My father's farm was much smaller than this, but the principles are similar, Zara replied. And I've always believed in understanding how things work. Most women I've known have little interest in the business side of ranching. Perhaps you haven't known the right women, Zara said before she could stop herself. To her relief, Jacob laughed a rich, warm sound that transformed his face and crinkled the corners of his eyes. Perhaps I haven't, he agreed, then more soberly. Until now. The simple statement hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. After dinner, they sat by the fire. Jacob pulled out a well-worn book, a collection of poetry that surprised Zara, and read aloud, while she mended a tear in one of his shirts that Mrs. Wilkins had pointed out earlier. The domesticity of the scene struck Zara suddenly. Here they were, barely acquainted, yet falling into the rhythms of married life as if they had known each other for years. It was both comforting and unsettling. I should get some rest, she said when Jacob finished reading. It's been a full day, of course. He closed the book. Zara, I want you to know I'm glad you're here. The simple sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. Thank you, Jacob. I'm beginning to be glad too. In her room, Zara changed into her nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed, brushing out her long, dark hair. Through the thin wall, she could hear Jacob moving about in his own room, the floorboards creaking slightly beneath his weight. It was strange, knowing he was so close this man who was to be her husband but was still largely a stranger. Yet there was something about Jacob Parker that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in a very long time. Perhaps it was the steadiness in his blue eyes or the gentle way he had with her, never pushing or demanding. Whatever it was, Zara found herself genuinely looking forward to knowing him better. She slept soundly that night without the nightmares that had plagued her for months. When she woke, sunlight was already streaming through the window. She dressed quickly, embarrassed to have slept so late, and hurried to the main room. Jacob was nowhere to be seen, but a note sat on the table. Zara had to go into town on business. Should return by midday. Mrs. Wilkins will come by this morning. Jacob the telegram, she remembered. Whatever it contained had necessitated this trip to town. Zara pushed aside her curiosity and set about making herself useful, feeding the chickens as Mrs. Wilkins had shown her and starting bread for the day's meals. Mrs. Wilkins arrived mid-morning with a bundle of clothing as promised. "These should fit you well enough," she said, laying out several dresses, a skirt, and some blouses. Emily was happy to share, said any woman brave enough to marry Jacob Parker deserves a proper welcome. "It's very generous," Zara said, touched by the kindness of these strangers. "Please thank your daughter for me. You can thank her yourself on Sunday. Church service is at 10, and everyone will be eager to meet Jacob's intended." The reminder that she would soon be facing the scrutiny of the entire community sent a wave of anxiety through Zara. What if they asked questions about her past? What if they somehow learned the truth about why she had fled Missouri? Mrs. Wilkins must have noticed her distress. "Now, don't you worry about the gossips," she said firmly. "Folks around here are good people mostly. They'll welcome you once they see how happy you make Jacob." "But I haven't made him happy yet," Zara protested. "We barely know each other." Mrs. Wilkins smiled knowingly. "I've known Jacob Parker for 5 years, my dear. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, not even Sarah, God rest her soul. There's something different about how he is with you, something hopeful." Zara didn't know how to respond to that. Could it be true? Did Jacob really see something in her that gave him hope? They spent the morning trying on the clothes Emily had sent. Most fit well enough, though some needed minor alterations. By the time they finished, Zara had a respectable wardrobe of 5 dresses, 2 skirts, 3 blouses, and even a Sunday best outfit with a matching hat. "Now you look like a proper rancher's wife," Mrs. Wilkins declared with satisfaction. The sound of hoofbeats outside announced Jacob's return. Zara smoothed down the pale yellow dress. She was wearing one of Emily's that fit perfectly and went to greet him. Jacob was just dismounting when she stepped onto the porch. He looked up, and for a moment he simply stared, seemingly transfixed by the sight of her in the yellow dress with her dark hair loose around her shoulders. "You look," he began, then cleared his throat. "That's a nice dress." "Thank you. Mrs. Wilkins brought some of her daughter's clothes for me to use," he nodded, leading his horse toward the barn. "That was kind of her." "Jacob," Zara called after him, "is everything all right? You seem troubled." He paused, then sighed. "Just some business matters that need attention. Nothing for you to worry about." But his tight expression and the tension in his shoulders told a different story. Zara watched him disappear into the barn, wondering what secret he was keeping from her and whether it would eventually come between them. Mrs. Wilkins departed after helping prepare lunch, leaving Zara alone with Jacob. They ate in relative silence, Jacob clearly preoccupied with whatever had taken him to town. "The circuit preacher will be here Sunday after next," he finally said as they cleared the dishes. "Reverend Michaels, he's a good man." "For the wedding, you mean?" Jacob nodded. "If that suits you." "We can wait longer if you'd prefer." Zara considered this. She had been in Agua Caliente for only 2 days, known Jacob for barely 48 hours. Yet in that short time, he had shown himself to be honorable, kind, and considerate of her feelings. He was offering her security, respect, and the promise of a good life. What more could she reasonably expect? "I think that would be suitable," she said quietly. "Unless you've changed your mind." "No," Jacob said quickly. "No, I haven't changed my mind." Relief washed through her. "Then 2 weeks from Sunday it is." Something that might have been happiness flickered across Jacob's face before the worried look returned. "There's something else we need to discuss, Zara, something I should have told you before." Her heart sank. Here it was the revelation that would shatter the fragile peace she'd begun to feel. "What is it?" Jacob ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "The telegram yesterday. It was about a man named Victor Blackwood." The name hit Zara like a physical blow. She reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. "What about him?" she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob's eyes narrowed at her reaction. "You know who he is." It wasn't a question. Zara nodded, unable to speak past the sudden constriction in her throat. "He's in Tucson," Jacob continued, "asking questions about a woman matching your description who might have come through on the stagecoach." The room seemed to tilt around her. Victor had followed her. Somehow he had traced her journey across half the country. The panic that she had kept at bay since arriving in Agua Caliente now threatened to overwhelm her completely. "Zara," Jacob's voice seemed to come from far away, "who is this man to you?" She looked up to find him watching her with concern, his blue eyes intent on her face. In that moment, Zara made a decision. If there was any chance of building a life here, of finding safety with this man, she needed to trust him with the truth. "He's my uncle," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "My mother's brother. After my parents died, I went to live with him in St. Louis." Jacob pulled out a chair, gesturing for her to sit. "Go on." Zara sank into the chair, gathering her courage. At first, he seemed kind. "Grieving for his sister," he said, "and wanting to help her daughter. But then—" She swallowed hard. "Then things changed. Did he hurt you?" Jacob's voice was dangerously quiet, not physically, not at first, but he— Zara closed her eyes, the memories washing over her. "He began to suggest that I should show my gratitude for his generosity. That a young woman with no family and no prospects should be willing to accommodate certain requests." Jacob's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue at her own pace. "When I refused him, he became cruel, locked me in my room for days, told everyone I was mentally unstable, grieving to the point of madness. He controlled every aspect of my life, what I ate, what I wore, who I spoke to, and he kept insisting that eventually I would see reason." Zara's hands were shaking now. "3 months ago, he came to my room at night, drunk, said he was tired of waiting for me to come to my senses." "Did he?" Jacob began, his voice rough with anger. "No," Zara said quickly. "I managed to fight him off, hit him with a candlestick. While he was unconscious, I took what money I could find and ran. I stayed with a former school friend until I saw your advertisement in the paper." She looked up at Jacob, her eyes pleading for understanding. "I had nowhere else to go, no other options. I know I should have told you in my letters, but I was afraid you wouldn't want me if you knew." Jacob was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, but Zara could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. "This man, your uncle, he's looking for you because he thinks you belong to him. Yes, and because I stole from him, not just money, but also." Zara hesitated, then reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "This was my mother's. He kept it from me, said it was payment for my keep. I took it when I fled." She opened the pouch and tipped a delicate gold locket into her palm. "It's not valuable, not really, but it was hers and I couldn't leave it behind." Jacob gently took the locket from her, examining the simple engraving before handing it back. "You did nothing wrong, Zara. The man is a predator who tried to take advantage of a vulnerable young woman in his care. He deserves worse than a knock on the head." The fierce protectiveness in his tone sent warmth spreading through Zara's chest. "But now he's looking for me, and if he finds me, he won't," Jacob said firmly. "Agua Caliente is a small place. Strangers are noticed. If he comes here, we'll know." "What if he comes before the wedding?" "I have no legal protection, no claim to stay here." "You have my protection," Jacob stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Wedding or no wedding, you're under my roof and my care now. No one is going to hurt you again, Zara. That's a promise." The certainty in his voice made her eyes fill with tears. "Why are you doing this? You hardly know me." Jacob reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "I know enough. I know you're brave and resourceful. I know you've endured things no woman should have to face. And I know that when you arrived crying 2 days ago, I made you a promise that you'd only cry happy tears from now on." His fingers tightened around hers. "I intend to keep that promise, Zara Matthews." A tear slipped down her cheek despite her best efforts to contain it. "I don't deserve such kindness." "It's not about deserving," Jacob said quietly. "It's about doing what's right and standing by my word." He released her hand and stood. "I need to go into town again, make sure everyone knows to be on the lookout for this Blackwood character." "Will you tell them?" "About me, I mean. Only what they need to know, that he's a dangerous man looking for a young woman who fled his abuse. Nothing more specific unless it becomes necessary." Jacob reached for his hat. "Will you be all right here alone? I can ask Mrs. Wilkins to come back." "No, I'll be fine," Zara assured him, wiping away her tears. "Truly." Jacob studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I won't be gone long. Stay inside just to be safe." After he left, Zara sat for a long while at the table, turning the locket over in her hands. In 2 days, her world had completely changed. She had gone from a frightened runaway to a woman with a home, a protector, and the promise of a future. It seemed almost too good to be true, and yet the threat of Victor Blackwood loomed large. She knew her uncle. He was a man who held grudges, who believed absolutely in his own righteousness, and who would not easily give up what he considered his property. If he had traced her as far as Tucson, it was only a matter of time before he made his way to Agua Caliente. Zara clutched the locket tighter. She would not let fear rule her anymore. Jacob had promised to protect her, and somehow, despite the brevity of their acquaintance, she believed him. There was a steadiness to him, an unwavering sense of right and wrong that made his words seem as solid as the mountains that framed the horizon. With new resolve, she rose and set about preparing for supper. Jacob would be hungry when he returned, and she wanted to show him that his faith in her was not misplaced. She would be strong. She would be the kind of woman who deserved a man like Jacob Parker. The afternoon passed slowly. Zara prepared a chicken for roasting, made biscuits from scratch, and even attempted an apple pie with the fruit Mrs. Wilkins had brought. As she worked, she found herself humming softly, a habit from happier days that she had almost forgotten. The sun was beginning to set when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief washed through her. Jacob was back. But when she went to the window to look, her blood froze in her veins. 2 riders were approaching. Neither was Jacob. One was a ranch hand she didn't recognize, probably from a neighboring property, but the other was Victor Blackwood. Even at this distance, there was no mistaking him: the portly frame, the distinctive gray bowler hat, the way he sat his horse as if it were beneath his dignity to ride such a creature. Her uncle had found her. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. Where was Jacob? Had something happened to him in town? Was this a trap? No, she decided instantly. Jacob wouldn't betray her, which meant he didn't know Blackwood had arrived. She had to warn him somehow. Zara glanced around frantically. The rifle Jacob had shown her, where he kept a Winchester rifle by the door for protection. She grabbed it, checking that it was loaded as her father had taught her years ago. Then she retreated to the bedroom, positioning herself where she could see through the partially open door while remaining hidden. A moment later, a knock came at the front door. "Miss Matthews?" called an unfamiliar voice, the ranch hand, she presumed. "Anyone home?" "Got a gentleman here, says he's kin to you." Zara remained silent, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain they must hear it through the door. Another knock, harder this time. "Miss Matthews, it's important, madam." Then her uncle's voice, smooth as honey but with that undercurrent of menace she knew all too well. Now, Johnson, my niece is likely just startled by our unexpected arrival. Zara, dear, it's Uncle Victor. I've been terribly worried about you." Zara's hands tightened on the rifle. She would not go back with him. She would die first. The door handle turned. They were trying to enter, but Jacob kept his doors locked when he wasn't home, a precaution she now thanked God for. "Appears to be locked up tight," the ranch hand Johnson said. "Maybe she went into town with Parker." "Perhaps," Victor said, his tone suggesting he didn't believe it. "When did you say he'd return?" "Should be back any time now. Said he just needed to speak with the sheriff." The sheriff. Jacob had gone to alert the law about Victor. Hope flared in Zara's chest. "I'll wait then," Victor said. "I'm eager to speak with the man who's been harboring my runaway niece." Suit yourself, Johnson replied, sounding uncomfortable. I should be getting back to my own place. Of course. Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Johnson. I'm most grateful for your neighborly kindness. Zara heard the sound of a horse departing Johnson leaving, but Victor remained, his presence a malevolent shadow outside the door. I know you're in there, Zara, he called, his voice hardening. This childish game has gone on long enough. You've caused me considerable trouble and expense. It's time to come home. Zara bit her lip to keep from responding. Home? The man was delusional if he thought she considered his house a home. The good people of this town have been quite forthcoming about your arrangement with Mr. Parker, Victor continued. A mail-order bride, Zara. How desperate you must have been, he chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. Did you tell him why you were so eager to marry a stranger? Does he know what kind of woman he's getting? The cruel insinuation made Zara's blood boil. This was how Victor operated, twisting the truth, making her the guilty party, manipulating situations to his advantage. He knows everything, she found herself saying, unable to stay silent any longer. And he believes me, not you. Ah, there you are, Victor said, satisfaction evident in his voice. Come out, Zara, let's discuss this like civilized people. I have nothing to say to you, please leave. I'm afraid I can't do that. You see, I have legal documents declaring me your guardian until your 21st birthday. You're only 19, my dear. Legally, you belong with me. Zara's grip tightened on the rifle. I belong to no one but myself. Such modern notions, Victor sighed. Your mother would be ashamed of how you've behaved, stealing, running away, throwing yourself at the first man who offered to take you in. Don't you dare speak of my mother, Zara hissed. She would be horrified by what you tried to do to me. What I tried to do. Victor's voice took on a wounded tone. I gave you a home when you had none. I provided for you, protected you, offered you a secure future. And how did you repay me? By attacking me and stealing from me. You tried to force yourself on me. Is that the story you've been telling? Who do you think people will believe, Zara? A respected businessman from St. Louis, or a young woman with a history of emotional instability who fled across the country to marry a stranger? The worst part was, he had a point. In many places, his word would carry more weight than hers. But this wasn't St. Louis, and she wasn't alone anymore. Jacob believes me, she said firmly. And so will the sheriff, Victor laughed. Your cowboy is a fool if he thinks he can keep what's mine. Now I'm losing patience, Zara. Open this door or I'll be forced to take more drastic measures. I have a rifle and I know how to use it, Zara warned, her voice steadier than she felt. There was a pause then. You wouldn't shoot your own uncle. Try me. The steel in her voice surprised even her. Another pause, longer this time. Then the sound of footsteps retreating, followed by silence. Zara didn't move, suspecting a trick. Victor wasn't the type to give up so easily. Sure enough, a moment later she heard noises at the side of the house. He was trying to find another way in. She moved to the window, keeping the rifle ready. Through the glass, she could see Victor circling the house, testing windows and doors. When he reached the kitchen window and found it unlocked, her heart sank. She had opened it earlier to let out the heat from the stove. Moving quickly, Zara positioned herself in the hallway, the rifle aimed at the kitchen doorway. If Victor came through that window, he would find her waiting. The minutes stretched endlessly as she listened to the sounds of Victor struggling with the window. Then suddenly, a different sound caught her attention, hoofbeats approaching at a gallop, more than one horse. Zara, Jacob's voice called urgently. Zara, are you all right, Jacob? She cried in relief. I'm here. Victor is trying to get in through the kitchen window. There was a commotion outside, shouting, the sound of running footsteps, then a scuffle. Zara kept the rifle trained on the kitchen doorway, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. A moment later, the front door rattled. Zara, it's me, Jacob called. Open the door. Still wary, she moved cautiously to the door. How do I know it's really you? You arrived crying, he said immediately. And I promised you'd only cry happy tears from now on. Relief flooded through her. Zara unlocked the door to find Jacob standing there, his expression a mixture of concern and barely contained rage. Behind him, The sheriff, a tall man with a weathered face and a star pinned to his vest, held Victor Blackwood by the arm. Her uncle's face was contorted with fury, and a fresh bruise was forming on his jaw. "Are you hurt?" Jacob asked, his eyes scanning her for any sign of injury. Zara shook her head. "No, he didn't get in. I heard them coming and hid with the rifle." Pride flickered across Jacob's face. "Good girl." The sheriff pushed Victor forward slightly. "This the man you told me about, Parker?" "That's him," Jacob confirmed grimly. "Victor Blackwood." "And you, miss," the sheriff said, addressing Zara directly, "this is your uncle who tried to assault you in St. Louis." "Yes, sir," Zara said, her voice steady despite the fear still thrumming through her veins. "That's preposterous," Victor blustered. "She's my niece, my ward. I've come to take her home where she belongs." "Funny," the sheriff said dryly. "She doesn't seem eager to go with you." "She's not in her right mind," Victor insisted. "Grief-stricken over her parents' deaths, she needs proper care and supervision, not this." He gestured disparagingly at the ranch house. Jacob took a step toward Victor, his hands clenching into fists. "You tried to force yourself on a girl in your care, a girl who'd lost everything and trusted you to protect her." "She's lying," Victor spat. "She's always been unstable, prone to fantasy. Ask anyone in St. Louis." "I have," the sheriff said calmly. "Wired the authorities there this afternoon after Parker came to see me. Seems you didn't tell the whole story when you were asking questions in Tucson." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Got a reply from the St. Louis police. They're quite interested in speaking with you about some other complaints that have come to light. Seems Miss Matthews wasn't the first young woman in your household to suffer your attention." The blood drained from Victor's face. That's a mistake. A misunderstanding." "3 separate accusations isn't a misunderstanding," the sheriff replied. "It's a pattern." Hope began to blossom in Zara's chest. There were others who had spoken out. She had thought herself alone, isolated in her experience. What happens now? Jacob asked, still standing protectively close to Zara. "I'll take Mr. Blackwood here back to town, hold him until the marshals can come fetch him for transport back to Missouri." The sheriff tightened his grip on Victor's arm. "He'll face charges there. You can't do this." Victor struggled against the sheriff's hold. "She's my ward. I have rights." "Not anymore," the sheriff said firmly. "Come along, Mr. Blackwood. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." As the sheriff began to lead Victor away, the older man turned back, his eyes locking with Zara's. The hatred in his gaze made her shiver, but she stood her ground, refusing to look away. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Yes," Zara said quietly, "it is." They watched as the sheriff mounted his horse, pulling Victor up onto a second mount with his hands bound. As they rode away, Zara felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, a burden she had carried for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be free of it. Jacob turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you really all right?" The concern in his voice broke something loose inside her. Zara dropped the rifle she'd been clutching and collapsed against his chest, her body shaking with delayed reaction. Jacob's arms came around her immediately, strong and steady, holding her as the tears came. "I was so afraid," she whispered against his shirt, "when I saw him riding up." "I should never have left you alone," Jacob said, his voice rough with regret. "When Johnson told me in town that he'd guided a stranger out to my ranch, I knew something was wrong." "It's not your fault," Zara insisted, looking up at him. "You couldn't have known he'd find me so quickly." Jacob's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away a tear. "I promised to protect you, and I will. He won't hurt you again, Zara, never again." The certainty in his voice, the tenderness in his touch, it was all too much. Zara felt something shift inside her heart, a wall crumbling that she had built to protect herself from further pain. "Jacob," she whispered, not even sure what she wanted to say. He seemed to understand anyway. His blue eyes softened and he leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Zara didn't want to pull away. She rose on her tiptoes instead, meeting him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question being asked and answered. When they parted, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I know it's fast," he murmured. "Too fast maybe, but I need you to know that this isn't just about the arrangement anymore, not for me." Zara's heart fluttered. "What is it about then?" "You," His voice was low, earnest. "Just you, Zara. The way you face down a nightmare with courage most men would envy. The way you fit into this place like you were always meant to be here. The way you make me think about the future again." Joy, pure and unexpected, bubbled up in Zara's chest. "I feel it too," she admitted. "I've been trying to tell myself it's just gratitude or relief, but it's more than that." Jacob smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his entire face and made him look younger, lighter. "Then maybe the preacher doesn't have to wait 2 more weeks." Zara laughed, the sound surprising her after so much fear and tension. "Mrs. Wilkins would never forgive us if we didn't do things properly." "True enough," Jacob agreed, his eyes crinkling with amusement. 2 weeks it is, then." He bent to kiss her again, and this time there was no hesitation. No question, just the certainty of 2 people who had found something precious and unexpected in each other. Later, as they sat by the fire eating the supper Zara had prepared, Jacob told her about his visit to town. How the sheriff had immediately taken his concerns seriously, how he had wired St. Louis for information about Victor Blackwood, how several townspeople had volunteered to help keep watch for the man. "They're good people here," Jacob said. "Once they get to know you, they'll welcome you as one of their own." "Even though I came with such trouble following me," Jacob reached across the table to take her hand. "Trouble finds everyone eventually, Zara. It's how we face it that matters, and you faced yours with more courage than most." His words warmed her, but a shadow of worry still lingered. What if there are other legal complications? Victor mentioned guardianship papers. The sheriff says those won't stand up once the assault charges are filed. "And besides," he added with a small smile, "a married woman doesn't need a guardian." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity and growing closeness. True to Jacob's prediction, the people of Agua Caliente welcomed Zara warmly once they learned the truth about her situation. Far from judging her, they admired her bravery in escaping her uncle and traveling across the country alone. Mrs. Wilkins became a constant presence, helping Zara prepare for the wedding and offering advice on everything from cooking for ranch hands to managing household expenses. The women from neighboring ranches brought gifts, handmade quilts, preserved foods, kitchen implements, and invited her to join their sewing circle that met monthly. Even the ranch hands showed their acceptance in their own gruff way. Emilio taught her Spanish phrases she might need around the ranch, while Ben shared stories of the early days when Jacob had first claimed the land. Young Daniel followed her around like a puppy, eager to help with any task she might need assistance with, and Jacob. Jacob became more to her with each passing day. They talked long into the evenings, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, their fears. He told her about Sarah, how they had grown up together and married young, how devastating her loss had been. Zara spoke of her parents, the happy childhood they had given her, and the terror of finding herself under Victor's control. Each confidence shared, each vulnerability revealed, brought them closer. By the time Reverend Michaels arrived to perform the ceremony, Zara knew with certainty that what she felt for Jacob Parker was not gratitude or security-seeking, but love pure and simple. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in late September. The ranch hands had decorated the barn with wildflowers and ribbon, and Mrs. Wilkins had prepared a feast that would feed the entire community that had gathered to witness the union. Zara wore a dress of pale blue silk, a gift from the women of Agua Caliente, who had pooled their resources to order it from a dressmaker in Tucson. Her dark hair was adorned with white blossoms, and around her neck hung her mother's locket, polished to a bright gleam. As she walked toward Jacob, who waited beside the reverend in his best suit, Zara felt tears welling in her eyes. But these were different from the desperate tears she had shed when first arriving in this strange place. These were tears of joy, of wonder, of gratitude for the unexpected path her life had taken. Jacob saw the shimmer in her eyes and smiled, his own gaze suspiciously bright. When she reached him, he leaned down to whisper, "Happy tears," Zara nodded, returning his smile. "The happiest." "I told you so," he murmured, taking her hands in his. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Reverend Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob's kiss was both tender and promising, earning whoops and cheers from the assembled guests. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than Zara had seen in one place since before her parents' deaths. Jacob kept her close throughout, his pride evident in every introduction, every shared smile, every touch of his hand at the small of her back. Later, when the guests had departed and they were finally alone, Jacob led Zara to the threshold of their home. Before she could step inside, he swept her into his arms, carrying her across as tradition demanded. "Welcome home, Mrs. Parker," he said softly, setting her down in the main room that now bore touches of her presence, curtains at the windows, a quilt over the back of the chair, wildflowers in a jar on the table. "It feels like home," Zara said, meaning it. In just 2 weeks, this place had become more of a home to her than any place since her parents' farm. "Because you're here." Jacob's eyes darkened with emotion. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he admitted. "After Sarah died, I thought that part of me was gone forever. But then you stepped off that stagecoach, and even through your tears, I saw something that called to me." "I was such a mess that day," Zara said with a small laugh. "You were beautiful," Jacob countered, "brave and broken and absolutely perfect." He kissed her then, and in that kiss was all the promise of their future together, the family they would build, the love they would share, the life they would create in this wild, beautiful land. 5 years later, Zara sat on the front porch of the ranch house, watching as Jacob taught their 4-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his new pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Sarah, played at Zara's feet, her dark curls bouncing as she arranged wooden blocks into precarious towers. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. Jacob's cattle operation had expanded, and Zara had added her own contributions: a thriving kitchen garden, a small orchard, even a few dairy cows that produced enough milk and cheese to sell in town. "Mama, look." Thomas called, his small face alight with excitement as the pony trotted in a circle with Jacob holding the lead rope. "I see you, sweetheart," Zara called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Jacob glanced up at her, the love in his eyes as clear and strong as it had been on their wedding day. He said something to Thomas, then handed the lead rope to Daniel, no longer a boy, but a capable young man who had become like family to them, before striding toward the porch. "What did the doctor say?" he asked quietly, sitting beside her and placing a protective hand over her slightly rounded belly. Zara covered his hand with her own. "All is well. He thinks early March for the baby's arrival." Relief and joy mingled in Jacob's expression. "Another spring baby like Thomas, MMM. Zara leaned against him, contentment washing through her, the perfect time for new beginnings. Jacob pressed a kiss to her temple. "Every day with you is a new beginning, Zara Parker." She smiled, thinking of that first day, how she had arrived in tears, certain her life was ending rather than beginning, how wrong she had been. "You kept your promise," she said softly. Jacob looked at her questioningly. "That first day when I stepped off the stagecoach crying," Zara reminded him, "you promised I'd only cry happy tears from then on." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by tenderness. "I meant every word, I know." Zara reached up to touch his face, still handsome though now bearing a few more lines around the eyes and mouth. "And you've made good on it every day since." As the Arizona sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land they had made their own, Zara Parker knew with absolute certainty that the terrified young woman who had fled Missouri would never have imagined such happiness awaiting her. But Jacob had seen the possibility from the very beginning, had believed in it even when she couldn't. And every tear she had shed since that day at their wedding, at Thomas's birth, at Sarah's first steps, at countless moments of overwhelming joy in between had been exactly what he promised. The happy tears of a woman who had found not just safety, but love beyond measure in the arms of her steadfast cowboy.